After two games in the Stanley Cup Final, the Edmonton Oilers and Florida Panthers have both taken one. On today's edition of Locked On Oilers, I explain how the Oilers changed the ending for 2025.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. This is my second Stanley Cup playoff run as host of Locked On Oilers, and I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So on today's episode, we are going to break down our takeaways and our big perspective after Game 2 of the Stanley Cup Final in a few different ways. Number one, the opening segment is going to be me just coping for 8-ish minutes about losing a winnable Game 1 that I won't say I was mad about, but definitely frustrated to get that far along, to play that well overall in the course of the game, especially as the overtimes went along, and to not prevail. It's really frustrating and frankly annoying. Our second segment will pivot to what's been working so far, why there's cause for optimism, and then in our final segment, we'll do the inverse. We will hit on what hasn't worked and why you might want to have a little more concern going into game number 3. So to start things out, I think everyone was aware this was going to be a back and forth series. These are two very evenly matched teams that largely mirrored Game 1 in Game 2, and you saw almost the full range of potential outcomes in a given game for these two teams. You saw the Oilers get out to a lead, you saw the Panthers take the lead back, and then you saw the Oilers tie the game to force overtime. Then you think about how Game 1 went down, where the Oilers were able to work their way back from 3-1 down to force overtime there and win. And look, we all know riding the overtime lightning, eventually the bill comes due. The Oilers already have won a number of games in overtime. That was their first loss in overtime so far these playoffs. And actually, it's very reminiscent of the first time the Panthers went to the Stanley Cup Final against the Vegas Golden Knights 2 years ago now, where they had won the first 3 overtime games they had played on their way to the Stanley Cup Final, beating, I believe it was the Bruins twice in their first round series to mount that comeback against what had been the best regular season team of all time in this present format, that Bruins team that the Panthers won against in 2023. So opening that up, taking it for what it is, and look, and I know I've done the Mike Francesa and look transition a few times already, and we're only a handful of minutes into today's show, but you have to temper the energy, because as soon as you start to feel good about your game this time of year, that's when your opponent's going to adjust. And look, to Florida's credit, they played a better game than they did in game number 1. Game number 1, the Oilers were firmly in control from the start of the third period through the eventual Draisaitl overtime winner. And they had their chances in Game 2, which is why you probably have a bit of a bitter taste in your mouth. You're a little bit frustrated, but it's important to keep these feelings in the proper context. This is not a regular season game against the Flames in February. This is the Stanley Cup Final against the team that has gone to 3 straight Stanley Cup Finals and is arguably the deepest they've been on those 3 runs this year. This is a really gifted group, and they will take small chances. And it's funny, I was watching the game on Friday night with a couple of my friends, and as soon as I saw Bouchard get caught in between on the breakaway that eventually became the Marchand game winner, I said, oh no. And they all didn't really react, clock it. But after Marchand had eventually scored, my one friend tapped me and he goes, how'd you know? And I said, I didn't know he was going to score, but I knew he was going to get a good look because Bouchard got caught on an in-between hop, like a shortstop on a ground ball that takes an extra skip when he's all square, ready to get in front of it. And he pinched a little too early and got himself caught a little flat-footed, and he wasn't going to be able to turn around and skate as fast as he needed to, and he opted to back skate, and ultimately Marchand gets around him. Skinner lets it in, and look, I really try not to get on the character and the intent of teams, because we all know these are hockey players. They all play up to and sometimes over that line of what's ethical and what's okay. But The Sam Bennett just falling on every goalie in plain sight act is one of the most tiresome things I can recall. It's not quite Sean Avery screening Marty Brodeur by looking at him and yelling at him, but it's in the same ballpark of petulant, I won't say arrogance, but immaturity. And look, I understand the rules are what they are. I understand the Panthers are held to a funky officiating standard because they take so many plays. They make so many plays that could be considered penalties. The referees won't call everything they do. And that creates this environment where they're going to keep pushing the envelope until they do get called for something. And Stuart Skinner has largely been okay in this series so far. You hope he's close to 100%. No one is 100% this time of year. So I think hoping for that is maybe a little bit optimistic or maybe even misguided. But you had a chance in game one. And if your B minus effort that I think you would say the Oilers played, you give up a shorty to Marchand, you didn't play great there. Your power play missed some opportunities. You needed a crazy individual effort from Corey Perry just to get to overtime. And you reset the ledger. You play a whole 20 minutes to get to that second overtime. And you go reasonably deep into that second overtime before a broken play eventually ends the game. And look, that's how hockey goes. I said it in my hit for game night on Friday that I sent to the guys. A double overtime game is ending on the ugliest goal imaginable. And a squeaker that barely gets through Skinner on a Marchand breakaway meets the definition of a stupid goal. And I didn't feel that the Oilers played poorly. Like I said, I think they played a B minus hockey game on Friday night. And against most teams, a B minus is good enough. Against the Stars, the Oilers B minus was good enough. Against Vegas, their B minus was good enough. But the Panthers are too good of a hockey team to give them room. And that was probably the biggest difference between game number one and game number two. The Oilers' mistakes in game one were contained. It was a bad turnover trying to break out, going from defense to offense that they were largely able to cut off and kill in transition and whatever else they weren't. Stuart Skinner was largely able to clean up any of the lingering big mistakes. But I don't think Skinner is particularly at fault here for losing game two. I think more than anything, you just got to contextualize the breaks of the game. And that's really my biggest takeaway through two games is there are so many individual variables on every single play over the course of a hockey game. It's really easy to drive yourself crazy doing the would have, could have, should have over a number of bounces. That Kapanen chance in overtime was very good. McDavid had a couple good chances in overtime as well. Draisaitl had a great chance in overtime that Bob got over and blocked. But you got to take these moments, contextualize them, and learn from them. And that's the great part about having a coach like Chris Knobloch that you feel some intrinsic confidence in. He has the capacity here to adjust to the adjustments. And it's an empowering feeling to know your coach is actively coaching as opposed to just saying, hey, let's execute our system a little bit better. We are going to take our first break of today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And through the first two games of the series, I'm going to explain to you what's worked well for the Oilers that they need to keep replicating going forward in today's edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. You ever check your bank account and wonder, where'd all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's really easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in as your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you stop managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much money I was spending on takeout and coffee and lattes and matcha. And now, with a little bit of self-discipline, I am budgeting smarter and saving more money. And most importantly, managing your money to set goals for things you really want to do. Like me, for instance, I had to put some money aside for a vacation this summer. Monarch Money is a great resource to help stay on the same page and stick to your goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money today. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year's subscription. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And through two games, I have been very impressed by the Oilers defense. And I know Evan Bouchard will always be a lightning rod figure within the Oilers community and hockey at large because he is a convention breaker. He is an unorthodox toolbox for his position. So more contemporary and forward-thinking minds see him as an elite play-driving offensive defenseman who's pretty good in transition and occasionally has a positional brain fart. And because the value of the offense he's able to contribute is so high because who he plays with and the expectations when they're out there. And look, I know there are a lot of people who want to give Bouchard flack and say, well, he plays with McDavid. How many of those points is he really working for? And the counterpoint to that is we've seen the Oilers try this with a litany of defensemen, whether it's Tyson Barrie or Duncan Keith or Darnell Nurse. They have consistently tried differing offensive defensemen. And Evan Bouchard is the only one who has had this level of playoff success as far as recording counting stats. And I understand he is not the prototypical one defenseman. He doesn't have the overwhelming physical traits. He's not huge. He's not strong. And we'll talk about it in the second segment. His net front play does leave something to be desired. I think the Oilers at large, their net front play in this series has probably been their weakest point. And that's just one area of the game. And I wanted to focus on positives first because I do think there are more positives than negatives. So number one, most importantly, Connor's been lights out. Anytime your best player is playing like he's your best player and the best player in the series overall, that is something that is ultimately going to lead to more positive outcomes over the course of a best of 7 series. And I know some people want to say, well, Oilers in 5, Oilers in 6, but like, if we're being reasonable here, you know how good the Panthers are. You know this series probably goes 6 or 7 games and what that means. That means the Panthers are going to win at least 1 or 2 more games in this series. So if you start to game that out and you start to I wouldn't say garner, if you would start to build your expectations and your rationality around the idea that this series is going to go 6 or 7 games, you can give yourself a little bit of mental peace. You can give yourself a little bit of grace in knowing the Oilers are going to have the best player in the ice in more games than not in this series. And Connor has that fire. And I saw a clip last night when I got home. I was scrolling through TikTok in bed before I go to sleep, as one does. Phone in bedtime is very important. But I saw one that had a really close-up picture of Connor on the blue line before game 1 of the final, when the ushers walked the Stanley Cup out and put it out on the table before the anthems. It's a very grainy and not the highest quality picture, but Connor looks back towards the Stanley Cup as the PA announcers talking, and it faintly looks like he has a tear in his eye. And look, I know there are some people you're projecting, blah, blah, blah. Based on the way I look at the picture, it does look like he's tearing up a little bit. And I think someone who understands the weight of this moment to the degree he does, answering the bell the way he has, only has to be reinforcing. The second part, and another thing that has gone very well for the Oilers at large in this series, has been their even strength defense. And we talked about that very extensively on Friday's episode ahead of game number 2, the idea that the Oilers want their defensemen to make plays on an island because that gives them more options. If your defenseman recovers the puck and he doesn't need that first pass to be less than 5-10 feet away from him, that opens up a fourth guy he can move the puck to. And the Oilers are very happy to go D to D to create an easier first exit pass. And that's in direct contrast with the Panthers, who in game number 1 ran a lot of rim plays, ran a lot of off the glass plays, and ran a lot of alley-oops. I feel at large, the Oilers are doing what they're supposed to defensively, and a lot of the plays that they've conceded against are broken plays. And these are where these types of series are won and lost. It's where it's a rugby scrum in the crease, it's a forward falling on a goalie, It's a breakaway in overtime, broken plays where plays outside of the conventional structure where someone makes a mistake or a player makes a player makes a play that is extraordinary. They make a special play that other players can't. And I also want to give a massive shout out to the Oilers' depth in this series because Corey Perry, Evander Kane, Podkolzin, Kapanen, they don't play enormous roles in terms of minutes, in terms of responsibilities. But when they have been needed to fulfill their checkbox, if you will, they have made some impactful plays. Perry tying the game with 17 seconds left the way he did with a Florida Panther defender all over him, knocking him to the ground, is one of the great individual efforts you'll see in this series. That is one of the best individual efforts you will see from any player on either team. That is pure resolve to get that shot off and find a way to make it happen. I think Kapanen, Podkolzin, and Evander Kane have all done an admirable job filling in for the Zach Hyman hit quota that surely would have set the playoff record by now through 2 games, especially with 2 overtime games. And I think the fact the Oilers missing Zach Hyman isn't seen as a glaring omission is why I feel so good about this group overall. This is a former 50 goal scorer, had, I want to say 16 goals in 25 playoff games last year, something in that ballpark, where I think he led the playoffs in goals last year. You're missing that guy, and you are still finding a way. You've scored 4 goals on Sergei Bobrovsky in consecutive games. That's something to feel really good about. Remember, last year through the first 2 games, the Oilers only scored 1 goal on Bobrovsky. They are consistently elevating the puck because we know Bob is so hard to beat down low. They are consistently finding ways to create offense, and it's not always Connor and Leon. Sometimes it is a Victor Arvidsson. Sometimes it is a Matthias Ekholm, a Corey Perry. And you have your depth going. You have your star players going. Your big key, as far as room for improvement, we're going to get to in a second. There's one specific area that I'm really going to hammer, but at large, if the Oilers play the way they have played in aggregate over the first 2 games, they are going to have a really good chance to win this series. And can weird things happen? Of course. This is the National Hockey League. But you have to feel like they are making progress in their overarching goal. 1-1 after 2 is not ideal, but going down to South Florida, you have an opportunity. You only need to win 3 of the next 5 games. That is not a crazy expectation. That is not an unreasonable ask. 3 of the next 5, especially when you played 2 5-gamers in the conference final in the second round, you might not want to go to a game 7 again, but you probably have a little more in the tank. You probably are a little better equipped for it this year than last year. And most importantly, you have shown otherworldly levels of resolve in these playoffs. The amount of comeback victories in extremely arduous circumstances are nothing short of remarkable. So this Oilers team really has that monster movie, he just can't be killed mentality. You start with that as the foundation, and you start to build that out with great individual performances from McDavid and Draisaitl. Evan Bouchard should be better in Game 3 than he was in Game 2, and you're already in really good shape. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, I'm going to explain what the Oilers need to do better going forward in this series, if they would like to change the ending. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, where you've got your team covered every day. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for hanging out on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And I really do try to present a balanced perspective. I know I'm always going to have a section of the peanut gallery that says I talk too nicely about the other team, I glaze the other team too much, but I look at this as a thought exercise. I look at this show as a means of sharing a range of outcomes, a range of opinions, I should say, excuse me. What I personally think is forged based on my experiences. I've been doing professional hockey content for 10 years now, writing blogs, podcasts, doing video podcasts, doing short form video. I've been doing this type of stuff for a long time now. But my perspective, my opinions have been developed and refined over the years by the work I've done, by the books I've read, by the podcasts I've listened to, by the media professionals and hockey people I have networked and talked to. And my goal is to continue furthering my understanding of the game. And anyone who tells you they fully understand hockey is lying to you, just flat out. Hockey is an innate feeling, it is an innate object. It is not something you will ever fully understand. It's not theoretical physics where we're literally pushing the boundaries of the laws of physics, but the game is constantly evolving. It is constantly changing. And the way people see it is changing. It is evolving. You know, think about that conversation we had in the second segment about Evan Bouchard, where the offensive impact offsets the bad defensive moments, because overall defensively Bouchard is relatively good. And as a matter of speaking, he's pretty good at breaking plays down in transition. He's pretty good at breaking pucks the other way. He occasionally gets caught a little far too up the ice and gets beat going back the other way, but he takes those risks because for the most part they work. So with that in mind, and I do want to be fair because I do understand that as Oiler fans, you come to a show like this for a little bit of a pep talk, a little bit of support. But that's some of what this show is. It is also a conversation. It is also a means of broadening your horizons. And the big takeaway I have through two games as far as what the Oilers need to do better, and the real challenge here is they don't really have the personnel to fix this. And it's a unique skill set in today's NHL amongst defensemen because the position has changed so fast. The Oilers need better net front play. And net front play is arguably the hardest component of being an NHL defenseman in 2025 because you are jockeying for position with another player. That guy is constantly trying to bump you into your own goalie. You are trying not to bump him into your own goalie. So that's the first problem. Then you're trying to keep him out of your goalie's line of sight. You are trying to stay out of your goalie's line of sight. That is two wrinkles. Number three, you don't always see the puck coming in on you and the guy you're defending, nor can the goalie. So we have the rare moments where a puck's going to go in off of you in past your own goalie. There are so many components to that net front play and the physically demanding aspect of it. You stand at the net front in either zone, you're eating a stick to the lower part of your back over and over again because that does not get called for cross-checking. As much as it should by the definition of the rule book, you are going to eat a lot of sticks to the lower back, a lot of sticks to the upper back, because that is the most valuable real estate on the ice. And the referees have been inclined to let the game take this shape in that area. It leads to all of these dumb goalie interference plays where, by definition, it's probably goalie interference, but because it doesn't meet a given threshold, it's not. It's one of those double-edged swords where adding the goalie interference review should have made the officiating better, but instead it's only made it feel more inconsistent more frequently, and that's the least desired outcome here. But net front play is a real challenge for this Oilers group. Matthias Ekholm is big and strong. He should be pretty good at it. Darnell Nurse is pretty big and pretty strong. He should be pretty good at it. But when the Panthers are a team that is designed for that stuff, you think about a Tkachuk, a Sam Bennett, an Evan Rodriguez, a Sasha Barkov, a Carter Verhaeghe. They have both size and skill to get to those dangerous areas of the ice with great frequency, and it creates a real cat and mouse effect where if you're chasing guys around trying to prevent them from creating from one area of the ice, they're going to end up creating from somewhere else. And until we get uniform officiating standards, frankly, uniform NHL standards for what you are and aren't allowed to do around the net front as an attacking player, we're going to continue to exist in this ambiguous space where sometimes you fall on the goalie and it's goalie interference. And sometimes, well, you kind of bumped this guy and you fell off of him into the goalie, so we're going to let that go. I think the Sam Bennett component of this, that he injured Anthony Stolarz in the Toronto series and then very clearly fell on Skinner as hard as he could in game two. I know No one other than a Florida Panthers fan is going to give Sam Bennett the benefit of the doubt for that. But the NHL at large does not care. And if you want to get into the Gregory Campbell conspiracy theory stuff, by all means, humor yourself. I get it. It's frustrating. You are looking for a rational answer to a question that doesn't have one. I think the NHL officials are poor. I think at large, they are managing the game instead of calling the game, which favors a team like Florida, who consistently plays over the line of what the officiating standard allows for. And they dare the referees, call it. I dare you, call us for 12 straight penalties and try and justify that, because that's not how the game is played. You know, to quote Evan Bouchard from The Wire, you can't do that. That's not how the game is played, because it's not. Referees aren't going to call 10 straight penalties on the Panthers for interference, holding, hooking, and all of the different things they do, because the referees are there to manage the game. If we call the Panthers for 2, the next one's got to go to the Oilers. If we call the Oilers for 2, the next one's got to go to the Panthers. And that's just the reality of the situation. It is frustrating. It doesn't mean you can't be mad about it, but at the same time, you have to understand that getting mad at the officials is only going to rise your blood pressure. It is not going to lead to anything productive, because the referees don't care. They are not good at their jobs. They have never been good at their jobs. I don't know if this is the case on Sportsnet, but for whatever reason, the TNT broadcast down here in the States insists on these are the best referees. They wouldn't be in the Stanley Cup Final if they weren't the best referees. And what a good call. And they're doing such a good... The referee praise on the American broadcast, specifically TNT. I know Eddie Olczyk is a revered figure in the hockey community. He's overcome a lot. He's overcame cancer. He's a very well-liked, nice guy. But he constantly is talking about how good the referees are. And I'm just shaking my head in disbelief that someone who's being paid to give their opinion on hockey could possibly think the NHL officials are good at their jobs. They're not in the slightest bit. But getting mad at the officials is not going to change the outcome. You have a better argument to just be mad at the Panthers for coming up with a strategy that no one else did before. And look, yes, there have always been dirty teams. There have always been teams that play over the line. But for the era we're in, the Panthers' unique brand of ruggedness, rattiness, and frustrating play, it's been extremely effective. And for the Oilers, they're going to have to find ways to cope with that around the net front. And I'm going to finish up today's show with one final thought. It is 1-1 after 2. Last year, it took 3 games for the Oilers to win one. Hell, it took 3 games for the Oilers to score more than 1 goal. So, you have a great opportunity in front of you. 3 of the next 5 games, 600 hockey. 3 of the next 5, you get to come back to Edmonton for 2 more of them. Believe in what you can do and find a way just a little bit better around the net front to be better, and you will swing this series. Thank you to everyone who made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Please, if you could be so kind, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, over on YouTube. If you're on Apple or Spotify, leave a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, leave a comment, and I will try my best to reply. Some people don't understand like the way media works and cherry pick things and really test my patience, but by and large, I reply to most comments. And if you could be so kind, be sure to check out Locked On NHL and Locked On NHL Game Night wherever you get your podcasts, or over on YouTube. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.